Yeah, just in case this is your introduction to my channel, like if this is the first video you're watching from me, just to give you a heads up on the kind of guy I am, I just ate a teaspoon of instant coffee, just because I wanted to know what it tasted like. Yeah, so, for the long-time subscribers, that's not unusual. For the people that are right now like, welcome to the show! Okay, so, Luffy, Gear 5th. This is one of the big one, guys. This is one of the big discussion videos about One Piece that you can think of, right next to, what is the One Piece? Or where is Raftel? Or, the history behind Goldie Roger and all that nonsense. This is one of the big ones that people have been asking, well, pretty much ever since Luffy went Gear 4th. Pretty much the same chapter that Luffy went Gear 4th, and everyone was still kind of taking in the Bound Man. There were a few people popping up that were like, okay, that's great, we know what Gear 4th is. Now what's Gear 5th? And even when Luffy does reveal Gear 5th, or if Luffy ever reveals Gear 5th, although I think it's pretty much set in stone that he will, when he ever does, it's going to be the question right away, like, what about Gear 6th? What about Gear 7th? He's going to run out of gears eventually. Every car has a limited number of gears, alright? You're not going to... Gear 72nd! You're going down, Lucci, for the 6th time? I don't know, okay. Right, so, just a few things before we get into the actual list. This will be 5 ideas or theories I have for Gear 5th. Just a few general things, like the way it's going to look, its inclusion of hockey and everything. Just remember, Luffy can pretty much apply hockey to any one of his gears. Okay, so, the reason Gear 4th is the way it is because Luffy just learned hockey on Ruskaina, and so when he was developing Gear 4th, he was developing Gear 4th with this newly acquired skill, hockey, in mind. So that's why Gear 4th is so closely attached to hockey. We actually haven't seen if Luffy would be capable of using Gear 4th the same way he would be if he didn't use hockey, like if he would even be able to maintain it. The level of bounciness and elasticity that Gear 4th provides, would he even be able to do that without hockey? We just don't know. I don't think he would be able to. But even though Gear 4th is the gear centered around his development of hockey, he's still able to add hockey to Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd. So, could Luffy apply hockey to Gear 5th? Of course. Will Gear 5th necessarily be completely centered around hockey as with Gear 4th? Possibly, but maybe not. So, just to throw that out there. Also is the general design, okay? Because these ideas I have for Gear 5th, these 5 ideas, these are just the applications of the abilities he'll be able to use, not necessarily like the layout of how he's going to look. I think a lot of people were kind of taken aback when Luffy went Gear 4th, because I think we were expecting something maybe a little bit more badass, like, I'm watching Hunter x Hunter right now, whenever Gon was fighting Pito. I'm not going to spoil anything, but holy shit, maybe we were expecting something like that. But you know what? It's that typical Oda style. It's like an Odaism. Can we make that a word? Okay, sure. It's an Odaism, where we were expecting Luffy to do super awesome shonen manga, Goku badass form, and instead we got this. And I think a few people were maybe taken aback. Some people maybe were even a little disappointed. But you have to actually sit down and think. This is Luffy we're talking about, and this is Luffy coming up with an ability. So, a giant bouncy ball of sheer death that's doing, like, the freaking, the statue pose thing, like, Gear Force! That's silly, and it's funny, but it's total Luffy. Like, that does look like something he would come up with. And it still does look cool. He gets all bulked up. He's got the neat hockey, which is like tribal tattoos, and he's got like the bags under his eyes, which resembles Nightmare Luffy. So I liked Gear 4th. I was a little bit dubious at it at first, I will admit, but it totally makes sense given Oda. But with that being said, since Gear 4th had kind of a goofy appearance or a more surreal appearance, maybe Gear 5th is the moment where maybe we get a little bit more of a serious ability. A more, like typical thing where Luffy gets more streamlined, more muscular, maybe he grows a little bit, something along those lines. Something that we would read and we would look at, and there would be no discretion of how we feel. It would be like instant intimidation. Like we flip the page and we see him go Gear 5th, and it's just like, whoa. Whoever he's fighting is gonna get the H, okay? That kind of thing. We might get that. Or we could go even further down the rabbit hole. See what I did there? But we could go even further down the rabbit hole with maybe something else that's even more goofy and ridiculous. I mean, let's be honest here. So far, if you're going to look at Luffy's gears in terms of just intimidation, probably the most intimidating one is Gear Second, which just, makes his body tinted, slightly more red and steam coming out. Gear Third, I mean, it's kind of hard to be, intimidated just by the aesthetic of Gear Third when, his, body is, bulging and, giant chest and giant arm, things like that. Gear Fourth, the rubbery bouncy ball. Doflamingo was laughing his ass off when he first saw it. He's just like, are you freaking kidding me? But yeah, in terms of just intimidation, we might get something with Gear Fifth, or it might even be goofy. We goofier than Gear Fourth. We just don't know. But that's just general discussions on how it's going to look. So let me know about how you feel about how the aesthetic of Gear Fifth is going to shake down. Now, on to 5 theories. These are in no particular order. I didn't rank these from the ones that I, the least believable to the most believable, the one I liked the most or didn't like the most. I pretty much just came up with 5 ideas and threw them out there. The first one I'm going to discuss because it's relevant to the story currently is a malleable rubber form, and it's going to be based off of Katakuri's fruit. So, for those of you that aren't caught up to speed, minor spoiler, Luffy's getting the shit kicked out of him right now in the manga. Pretty bad, actually, by the second son of the Big Mom family, Charlotte Katakuri, or Dogtooth, however you want to, say the translation. And he has the power of the Mochi Mochi no Mi, which provides him with abilities pretty similar to Luffy. Anything you can do, I can do better, kind of that kind of shtick. And to the point where, Luffy was throwing elephant guns at him, and Katakuri could replicate it perfectly. We don't know if Katakuri could replicate things like Gear Second's speed or Gear Fourth's bounciness. But the way that Katakuri stated it, he's like, yeah, anything you can dish out with your rubber fruit, Mochi is superior. On top of every other ability that Luffy has, he also apparently, not apparently, he can apparently mimic everything Luffy's got, but the things that we know for certain with Katakuri is that he's able to do things with his body that Luffy simply cannot do. Like, he can replicate his limbs, so he can, instead of Luffy using Gatling, which is just his 2 fists, just like a volley of punches that's really fast, Katakuri can actually make more fists and more legs and stuff like that to attack him with. He can hide weapons in his mochi. He pulled out like a trident last chapter. So, I think what's going to happen here is Luffy's going to continue to get the crap beat out of him by Katakuri. And he's going to escape somehow. And just like how he got defeated by Aokiji and he started to think, I need to figure out a new way to fight. Just like how he was getting the crap beat out of him by all those giant animals on Ruskaina. And he realized, I have to figure out a new technique to fight back. I think it's going to be the same thing here. This is how Luffy's mind works. He tries his very damnedest. He tries everything in his arsenal. And if it doesn't work, he's got to come up with a new trick. This is going to be a situation where he's got to come up with a new trick. And he's going to take probably a few cues from Katakuri. Given that their fruits are so similar, I could see Luffy thinking like, okay, how can I make my devil fruit work for me the same way that Katakuri makes his mochi fruit work for him? Now, Katakuri is classified as a special paramecia. I'm not going to go into that here. I'm not here to talk about Katakuri. Made a video about him. Made a few, actually. You go watch that. But it might be possible that Luffy could also potentially be a special paramecia, might be in the same class as him there. So, malleable rubber, basically being able to actually manipulate rubber in a way beyond just stretching it, actually being able to mold his rubber in a specific shape. I know I've mentioned this kind of stuff before, but now that we've actually run into Katakuri, who's actually been displaying abilities like that, we have a better idea on what Luffy might be trying to do here. Making more limbs, so he can make his Gatling more than just a volley of punches, forming his body into certain weapons or things like that. He could shape his fist into like a battle axe and then harden it up with hockey to make it actually sharp as a battle axe. And then when he uses Gum Gum Axe, Gum Gum Axe is with his foot, but you know what I mean. Like, he can actually make the weapons that he names his attacks after and like attack an enemy with that. Something along those lines. I also read a lot more about rubber, like actually how it's made and stuff. There's natural rubber that comes into existence in nature through like, latex and stuff that comes from like plants like dandelions and stuff. And then there's, synthetic rubber that's created in factories. And after doing a lot of research on rubber, I've come to a few conclusions. Number one, it's boring as hell. Never look that up. And the second thing I learned was that the Goodyear blimp was named after Charles Goodyear, who worked for many years to try to develop hardened rubber that we now see in blimps and like on car tires and stuff. What does this have to do with Luffy? Absolutely nothing! I tried to look up like, oh, maybe there's a clue in the development of rubber that can maybe I could come up with something Luffy could do, and I'm like, there's nothing here. The closest thing I got to was like, you know, the latex malleability of rubber, that sort of deal. That's all I could come up with. Either that or Luffy turns into a blimp, which once again, I could see him totally coming up with that idea. Gumu Gumu no blimp, and being able to like float over water. He could store gases in his body. He could probably do that. Luffy inhales a shit ton of helium and then balloons himself up. If that happens, I want some royalties, because that's something totally Luffy would do, and don't say he wouldn't. Okay, so number 4, and I don't really know how this would play into it, but bear with me on this. This is the general premise. What do all of the gear techniques that Luffy uses have in common? They all take advantage of one system in the human body. Gear second, circulatory system, your blood flow. Pumps his legs, gets the blood flowing faster, gets his heart pumping faster, and he can move at incredible speeds. Gear third, skeletal system, blows air into his bones, makes his body bigger. Gear fourth, muscular system, gets stronger and also increases his elasticity. Gear fifth, kind of running out of systems in the human body at this point, but something we do have is the nervous system. Now, I'm not saying Luffy's gonna blow air into his nervous system, because even I have to say, even in anime logic, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm not even saying, like, Luffy's not an idiot. I'm going to repeat that again, just in case you were like, wait, what? Luffy is not an idiot, but he doesn't know a lot about biology. He doesn't know about human biology. In fact, a lot of times I think Luffy just got really lucky. He was like, I'm going to try blowing air into my thumb and see what that does. Oh, holy crap, okay, I could work with this. Something along those lines. Not like Luffy would understand what the nervous system is, but what is the nervous system? The nervous system is basically the brain's way of, you know, connecting and communicating with the rest of the body. You know, you touch something and electrical signals get sent from your nervous system up to your brain in like the fraction of a second to let you know what's going on. So, maybe something to do with observation, increasing his heightened awareness or whatever. Maybe it's like reflexively reacting to attacks. I'm not saying, I really don't, like I said, I don't really have a cohesive idea for this. I'm just saying that if all 3 of the other gears we've seen focus on a system in the human body, then it stands to reason Gear 5th would also focus on a system in the human body. And I think we're running out of systems at this point, so nervous system seems like the best option. So yeah, that's probably my weakest one. But moving on to number 3, and this is something that's much more easy to comprehend. It just combines all the other 3 together. Okay? Which is something we've kind of sort of seen a few times in the story. Not all of them together, but we've seen Luffy combining gears. We've seen him when he was fighting Moria combine second and third together to make Giganta Jet Shell. Even when Luffy was fighting Doflamingo, I thought what he was doing was combining Gear 3rd and Gear 4th to make King Kong Gun, but I think he wasn't making his bones bigger. I think all he was doing there was just even pumping more air into his muscles to make Gear 4th even more devastating. But he might have also been combining them there as well, for all we know. But Gear 5th, I'm imagining in this situation, this scenario, I'm imagining him going into Gear 5th, compressing his body down, to the point where it's just like an entire body. He still has the tribal tattoos around him, like from Gear 4th, but he's like still maintaining his form. He's got the ripped abs and everything like that, maybe a little bit more muscular, maybe a little bit taller or something like that. He has the steam coming off of him, and he still has the red tint, so he's like red and black, which coincidentally are my high school colors back when I was in high school. So maybe that's something I'm just psychologically prone to, the red and black scheme. But yeah, so the red from Gear 2nd, the hockey that's black from Gear 4th, and then he would be able to increase the size of his body at will without blowing into his thumb or anything like that. He could just stretch out his arm, and then right before it hits the enemy, boom! And then, shrink back down, stretch it back, and then he could just do that, like at the split second. Kind of like how after the time skip, Luffy only goes Gear 2nd when he's fighting an opponent, like for that brief moment. Like, he'll go Gear 2nd, hit you, and then turn it off. Kind of like that, but with Gear 3rd. So that's one of the more simple ideas, but it makes sense, and it really I would be fine with that. It would be a cool idea for Gear 5th without doing something crazy ridiculous with it, and that does seem like something Luffy could come up with, like, instead of, like, coming up with in a relatively short amount of time. Instead of coming up with a whole new trick, just being like, okay, I have enough unique abilities at this point. I have an ability that makes me move faster, I have an ability that makes me my body bigger, and I have an ability that increases my elasticity. What if I could somehow smash all those together and create one ability? Probably wouldn't be able to use it for very long, probably would only be able to use it for probably even maybe a few minutes, maybe even a few seconds at a time, but in this form, he would be able to take advantage of all gears and would just be freaking invincible, and I could see Oda drawing him in this really badass form that just, you know, you look at it and once again, that's the form that's just like, oh boy. You know, so not necessarily a new ability, but just incorporating all abilities into one form, basically creating a whole new fighting machine that'll wreck your day up 8 ways to Sunday. Okay, so next up, this is involving Awakening. Now, I didn't mention Awakening at this point, but I guess I could say that Luffy's Awakening could also be Gear 5th. When Luffy, whatever ability he gets when he awakens, he'll just call Gear 5th. So just maybe brace yourself for that. Or Gear 6, depending on when Luffy awakens. If Gear 5th is really just a combination of all other techniques, that might not be an Awakening. But if Luffy develops like a whole new ability together, which I believe is what an Awakening is going to be, it's going to be something completely different that we've never seen before, not just an augment of something we've seen like with another gear, an actual new ability. One of those is the Rubber World. So we've seen it with Doflamingo, when Doflamingo was a Paramecia. When Doflamingo was awakened, his Ito Ito no Mi, he was able to turn the surrounding area into string. And I think Doflamingo even said, you know, when you awaken, it's the ability to have your powers beginning to affect things other than your body. Now, he might have just been saying that because maybe that's the way he experienced his awakening. That's not really indicative of every single awakening, because we've seen with Zoans, you know, awakening is not the same thing as, you know, affecting things outside your body. With Logia's, I think it was pretty obvious with Punk Hazard that a Logia's awakening actually affects the weather, so that's true that it's affecting things other than the body, but it doesn't do it with the zone. And so Paramecia might be a grab bag. It might be some of them might affect the world differently. Some of them might just change the body. So once again, maybe the awakening could be Luffy becoming more malleable, or, you know, something like that. Maybe be turning more into like a liquid kind of rubber, something like that. Or it could be Rubber World, where the entire area around him is converted to rubber. Now, if you actually think about that, that would not be a huge advantage to Luffy himself, because Luffy's already made of rubber. If Luffy wants to bounce off a building, he can do that already. The building doesn't have to be made of rubber, he's made of rubber. But it would be a huge advantage because his opponent would have to compensate, and Luffy might be able to control, like, what level of bounciness or elasticity this part has and which part this doesn't have or anything like that. If Luffy could actually have control over it, that would be pretty cool. I could even see a name of a technique now, Gamu Gamu no Pinball, where Luffy turns the world into rubber and controls the levels of elasticity, and his opponent is just getting knocked around as Luffy's punching him, knocked around like a pinball. That would be really cool, and once again, I could see Luffy coming up with an ability like that. Yeah, so not so much an ability affecting him, but being a disadvantage for the opponent rather than an advantage for him, I guess I should say. It could also lead into other things like the malleability, liquid rubber, maybe his body, you know, melts to a degree and he can affect it that way. Something else I'm just going to throw out there, his whole body is rubber. Oda's made a point to specify that. Blood vessels, bones, muscles, skin, everything, including hair. Luffy could do something rubbery with his hair. I don't think we've ever seen that. I don't think we've ever seen Luffy, you know, stretching out his hair. But by the logic Oda has stated, he could. So maybe we'll see something with that. I don't know. I'm not saying he's going to turn into, like, Sunny from Toriko, but I mean, like, by logic, it would mean that his hair is elastic, and we've never seen him do anything with that before. So, there you go. We could just see Luffy's new ability focus on manipulating his hair. At least, maybe an aspect of it. Not to say the whole focus is going to be Luffy's hair, but it could have an aspect to it that we've just never thought about before. Or he could manipulate his whole body by a thought. If he becomes truly, like, liquid or, like, malleable, he can, you know, control his body with his mind, and then attack an opponent that way. So, there you go. So the last thing I want to bring up, number one, Okay, so the last thing on the list is number 1, and this is something that Luffy's used a few techniques that summon up an element. We've seen him use Red Hawk, which is the most obvious one, the coolest one, really, where Luffy, stretches his arm back and then his arm lights on fire, whether that be because of the friction or because of Haki or because the fire that burns in his heart from his long-lost brother Ace, or whatever you want to say. Luffy can summon fire when he wants to, pretty much whenever he wants to. I mean, he did it underwater. I mean, I guess that means he could spawn fire whenever he wants to. He can't control it like Ace could, but he could summon it pretty much whenever. And also, when he was fighting Don Chinjiao, we saw him use electricity with Thor Elephant Gun. And that was like static electricity, once again, maybe because of the friction and everything when they were clashing or combining Conqueror's Haki with it, because we've seen when Conqueror's Haki clashes, it has like elements of electricity, and so I'm just going to throw out there, maybe Gear 5th is an elemental ability. Where Luffy can manipulate fire or electricity or something like that. The electricity one is actually really cool because, I think we've already established this and it's pretty common knowledge. Rubber does not conduct electricity. It's an insulator, okay? So if Luffy, but he could still make it, all right? So that would be cool for Luffy to maybe through Haki or Conqueror's, I guess that would be the same thing, maybe Armament Haki or Conqueror's Haki. The thing with I keep bringing back Haki is because I feel like the way Red Hawk works is that he Armament Haki's up his arm, and then the friction of the air hits the armament in a way that actually generates the flame. That's the way I always viewed it. I don't know. But if that's the case, and Luffy could summon electricity, and his body is insulated naturally, so he could have like a layer of Haki with the electricity emanating from it, and then attacking the opponent, and he's like completely insulated, so he would be fine. He wouldn't suffer any injuries. That would just be cool. Just to see that, and that would be something like if he ever fought against Eneru again, which might happen. I think we're going to see a few rematches in Luffy's future, as particularly Lucci. I think we're definitely going to see a Luffy-Lucci rematch, but it's very likely we might see a Luffy-Eneru rematch too. Eneru's still around, all right? I don't know if Oda's going to go for that, but I could see a few rematches, and that would be cool for Luffy to fight against him with like an electrical power or a fire power. It would not be even close to the same way Ace or Sabo can manipulate fire, but, if going along with the friction aspect, if his whole body's coated in Haki, and maybe he moves with the speed of Gear 2nd or something, he would be constantly on fire, and Luffy would ignite, and that's how he fights. He fights with fists of fire. I don't know, but once again, it's a shonen, okay? It has to sell merch. That's a big part of this industry, okay? So, Oda's job is, I want to draw something that looks really cool for a shonen that people would enjoy, and we could sell a bunch of merchandise off of. That's not the only reason he's coming up with things, but that's a reason why he comes up with things. All right, you got to be thinking of the merchandise in the industry, okay? So, yeah. Those are 5 ideas I have. Increased malleability, a la Katakuri, something to do with the nervous system, maybe. All the gears combined into one. Awakening type that, rubberizes the world around him. Gamu Gamu no Pinball. And something that maybe involves elements like fire or electricity that we've already seen him utilize. Either fire through friction or Conqueror's Haki electricity, whatever. Something combining that together. So anyway, thanks for watching, everybody, and have a good night. Oh, and by the way, for my Dragon Ball Super fans, tonight, I think you already know what tonight is. It's going to be Goku versus Jiren. It's going to be a really big one. Do not know if I'm going to be able to do the review tonight, so you might have to hold on that till tomorrow. And plus, it's a really big event, so I really want to do something. I don't want to do it when I'm tired. I don't want to do it when I'm just kind of like, ugh. I really kind of want to do it, my way. With a little bit more energy and do it justice. So you might have to wait till tomorrow for that. But I'm definitely going to do a coverage of that those 2 episodes. So anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure to subscribe to my channel and follow these links to whatever you want. This will be Tekking101 signing out. Later, everybody.